Welcome to The Next Level, conversations that propel business. The next hour is all about the entrepreneur, why they start businesses, how they make their businesses grow, how they overcome failures and achieve success. Your host, Bob Gibbons, founder of Riata Commercial Realty, a commercial real estate advisory and tenant advocacy firm. Bob will ask probing questions to find impactful solutions that will help take your business to the next level. And now, here's Bob Gibbons.
Welcome to The Next Level, conversations that propel business. Imagine you've bought a company or are an entrepreneur who started and built a company to a significant size, and now you wonder if you're the best person to run it or if you have the best systems in place to take it to the next level. Like how I worked that in there, Kent.
I like that.
But you don't feel ready or able to hire a full-time C-level team to help you get there. So is there another option? Well, today's show is all about the use of fractional or part-time providers of C-suite services. These are things like chief financial officer, chief information officer, chief marketing officer. It's amazing to me how many new forms of chief whatever officer have been created in the last decade. So when should you use these folks? How do you know which one to hire? How to transition from fractional to full-time in-house folks? We have a panel of fractional executives here with us today. And so our first guest is Glenn Catlin. He is a CFO, fractional CFO with B2B CFO, a national provider of fractional CFO services. You can find him at glenncatlincfo.com. And there's one N in Glenn, and Catlin is spelled Katlein. So glenncatlincfo.com. We also have Kent Barner with us. He is a CIO, Chief Information Officer with CIO Suite. And he's easy, just CIOsuite.com.
Yep.
Thank you. And then we also have Andrea Overman, and Andrea is Chief Marketing Officer with Chief Outsiders, and you can find them on the web at chiefoutsiders.com. Welcome, everybody.
Thank you. And my suite is SUITE, not SWEET, right?
Well, thank you for I would have expected that from Glenn, not from you.
Okay, sorry.
All right, so let's start this off by why don't each of you just give us a quick rundown on how you explain to people what you do. So, ladies first,
okay.
Andrea.
All right. So, Chief Outsiders, we work with medium to small businesses and helping them from both a strategy and execution viewpoint, from a marketing viewpoint. We have 60 Chief Outsider CMOs across the country, and we work with. Right now, we've got almost 100 organizations that we're on the C-suite working with those leadership teams. So typically, it's when an owner or a chief executive officer realizes that they're at a point that they want to grow, but for some reason, their vision isn't being met. You know, they're not growing. So that's where we come in and can help them get there.
Glenn?
So I am a partner with B2B CFO. We have about 220 across the country, 19 in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And each of us will help our clients grow successfully and exit successfully with strategic financial management leadership specific to their needs, impacting the value, the cash flow, the profitability of their business.
Very cool. All right, Kent.
So I bring 25 years of CIO experience to mid-market companies, and so I was part of an organization that had many companies underneath it that I was the CIO for, and that's when I thought of doing this. So I like to say that I'm the technology advisor to C-level executives and business owners around technology strategy.
But you started this company yourself, and you're building it to have other CIOs as part of it, but you're not part of a national organization like Glenn and Andrea, right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And there's not, I'm sort of blazing a trail here, and there's another company in town that does this for, I would say, upper market companies. And so I've started to identify a few people like myself across the country.
Okay.
But in Dallas, I find I'm the only one in the kind of the mid-market space.
So what's the name of the company that serves the
I can't
bigger-
endorse them.
I'll
No,
find it.
I know Fortium would
Fortium,
be
okay.
Fortium,
Fortium,
and
okay.
you know they spun out of Tatum, and they've got probably I don't remember the number, 50, 60, 80 across the United States.
Give
And
me
so,
another name I don't know.
Oh, okay. I was like,
I haven't heard of either one of those.
oh, okay. Yes.
Okay.
I can explain Tatum to you, but it's probably not important.
Okay.
Yes.
Good. So who are your main competitors, Glenn?
We're the only national firm that actually focuses on lower middle market companies
Okay.
where it's not temporary full-time, because that's not what we do. We're not temporary full-time. We're flexible, affordable, as needed, which can be ongoing or project-based. Without a doubt, there are a few regional and local firms that have gotten into this space, and there's a lot of different flavors of what others call CFO services.
Yeah. I mean, I've known other people that have been a B2B CFO partner and then went out on their own, sort of unbranded, if you will, and then some that are with other companies. But like you say, none that I know of that's a big national brand that does what you guys do. Andrew, so Chief Outsiders is, did you say national?
Yes.
Okay. So what do you have competitors on that?
Not on the
Scale?
national scale. What we find typically are maybe some regional folks or people that have been chief marketing officers and have gone out on their own. And sometimes there's a confusion in the market between what we do and maybe an advertising agency does. They're not the same.
Right.
So it's more confusion than a competitor.
Well, go ahead and give us that rundown. What is the difference between
So-
you and just going to hiring a marketing advertising agency?
We work very closely with marketing and advertising agencies, but the way we look at it is there's things that need to be done before we get to that execution phase. And we have some principles that we follow. We say insights, which is also known as research. Then you put together your strategy, and then you execute. And we like to say we make sure we don't do random acts of marketing that can cost a lot of unnecessary dollars. And so, yes, then when we're in that implementation or execution phase, we work very closely with advertising agencies. So, and there's very good ones that we work with. So we're happy to do that, but it's not to replace what we do.
So you're the strategy, they're the implementation.
Correct.
Is that fair to say? I mean, that's probably way overly simplified.
It is.
No, I
And
think
as a
that's it.
CMO, we work to sort of be general managers over the entire process. So, but yes, they're the creative people, the artists and the writers, et cetera.
And, well, I think you hit the nail on the head. That's very common. I'm strategy, right? And then I'm going to bring in other people for execution and oversee that, negotiate that. Or if it's not another consulting firm, it could be they need to staff it. So they, the decision of insourcing versus outsourcing and helping companies through all of that.
Well, in your space specifically in the information and technology, it seems like I see people that claim to be fractional CTO, CIO kind of folks, but on their same website, they still provide all the services themselves. Yeah. So I kind of question, well, which is it? And can you really be independent and agnostic to, whatever flavor is going to solve the problem if you're the one providing that and also setting out the strategy?
Right, and that's a great softball. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Nice law. Yeah, some of the other competitors in my space have, large consulting companies, and so I think it's hard for them to be objective when it comes to bringing in outside resources. They're going to bring in their own, right? And so I was talking to a guy recently, they're starting to move into Dallas from Atlanta. And I posed that to him because he likes to say leadership is one of the things they provide, so strategy and that type of thing. And I asked him, I said, well, how can you be independent? And he says, well, one time we almost fired ourselves. And I was like, are you sure?
Almost. I think almost was the key.
Right. So that's one of the things I think differentiates my practice from some of the others that you may run into.
Sure. And Glenn, I guess you see this as well because you're not an accountant. You're a CPA, but you don't do accounting.
Right, and on that theme, there are CPA firms that's the first one a business owner goes to for strategic financial management because it's the only one they know to go to. Some try to add CFO consulting but don't have the depth of business management experience. And then there are those who want to outsource the entire accounting function, but the CFO role doesn't have to be full-time. What I love about our firm and our model is I have no bias to other services being recommended inside the firm I'm with. Anything I can't offer my client, I can custom find the right solution for the business owner. So that's one of the reasons, I chose to stay in the national firm instead of become a part of some of the other models that have their flavor of trying to do everything for a business owner.
Now, when you're working with a firm that already has an infrastructure in-house for whatever your sort of related service is, so accounting for Glenn, technology for you, marketing and advertising, that, a lot of companies have in-house teams that are already working that. So can you still work with those people?
Absolutely.
And how do you do that without significantly threatening the people that are sitting in those seats?
We find a lot of times they don't have a chief marketing officer. They may have some junior marketers and junior folks that are doing a great job, and they are looking for some leadership and a roadmap and help us. So we literally, come in and can coach those teams and direct those teams and help those teams. And there's one situation that I'm talking to right now that they're looking for someone to come in and help their VP of marketing sort of learn how to be a chief marketing officer. So we're happy to do that, and we work with whomever they work with. If they have an outside agency, we work with, and they're happy with them, we work with them. If they have internal folks, and we are completely agnostic. And I always like to bring up the point that we don't mark anything up. We don't say, okay, come work with this organization, and then we make extra from that. We just pass it all through, and we try to find the best resources that we possibly can for our particular client.
Actually, I think that's a great question when you ask it, because it's easy for one of us to speak to our role and the fact that we don't view ourselves as a threat. But what I've learned after joining the firm 10 years ago is the perception of the individual that's already there. And they'll naturally think it's a threat. Either it's a reflection they're not doing their job well, or they perceive themselves as growing to the CFO role. And so it's important initially to help the person we're going to work with appreciate that I'm there to help them be more successful, offer them experience they don't have, whether it's just solving the issues they don't know how to solve, or it's coaching a controller to reach their full potential. And once I help them realize I don't want to go back to working for one company, they discover I can be their best ally instead of being a threat. But that has to be addressed. You can't take it for granted.
That's a good point.
Okay. Well, we'll be back in just a minute. We're going to take a quick break. Thanks so much. Okay, y'all.
Hi, my name is Fern, and I've been an empowered team member at Alkali for over 5 years. I first learned about Alkali through an online job board and was intrigued to learn that Alkali was a Dave Ramsey endorsed local provider. But what captivated me was Alkali's mission statement, which is closely aligned with my own beliefs. So what's kept me at Alkali for over 5 years? First, Alkali's 5 core values match my own. Second, I've been empowered to use my unique abilities to impact our community, our clients, and Alkali. If you'd like to learn more about becoming an empowered Alkali team member, visit our website, alkaliservices.com. That's ALKALI services.com.
We are back, and we're talking to Glenn Catlin, Kent Barner, and Andrea Overman. And these are all folks in the C-suite, but only on a part-time fractional basis. So, Kent, one thing I'm interested in knowing is, we were talking before as to sometimes you are perceived as being a threat to the in-house whatever team. So I'm guessing you're not trying to sell your services to the technology group within a company. So who are you selling to?
And so I've been doing this less than anybody in this room today.
That's why I asked you first, because I'm going to check your answer for that.
And messaging is so important. And so one of the things when I left the corporate world, I called myself a fractional CIO, and the people I would call on were other CIOs. Well, direct threat, right? And
Yeah.
the doors weren't open or welcoming, and so changed my approach two ways. One is to call myself an advisor, which seems kind of a small thing, but it means a lot more to the CIO if I come in as an advisor, right? I can augment and help them in the manner that Glenn was referring to. And then also the target audience. The CIO is not necessarily my best target. And so really the rest of the suite is a better group for me to, whether it's the CEO, COO, CFO, CMO, huge technology spend on the CMO side these days. And so I shifted that focus as well. And so a lot of lessons learned in this first year and a half of business. But it's very important to understand exactly what you asked, who's that target and how can you not be threatening just with simple words, right?
Andrea, who do you see as your primary best contact?
We find that the CEO is the person that really needs to look at the organization and realize that they need some help. We also realize that a lot of times private equity organizations are involved with making investments, and then they have a vision of, oh, wow, here's where this organization is, and we need to grow quickly because we have some objectives to sell this company in so many years. So that is another way that they are not making the decision, but they will introduce us to the CEO who needs help with growth. And back to your point earlier is that in all of our organizations, there's not a CMO. I mean, that's why they're looking at us. So we're not threatening a CMO. We may be threatening to a VP, but I think the gentleman makes some really good points about being sensitive to that.
Yeah. So Glenn, I got to think that your contact has to be the CEO as well.
Without a doubt, it's the CEO, the business owner. Usually the CFO is the first one to be a part of a C-suite for a company when they grow to that stage. So when I'm introduced to them, they haven't even reached their first C-suite member of their management team. So it's definitely the CEO or the business owner is going to be the decision maker. Will they trust somebody else getting close to how they manage the money of their business instead of doing it themselves? But as important for me is a network of relationships such as what we have in the room who can actually help a business owner even understand how a CFO is different from their CPA or their accountant or their controller. Because often for my role, that's the biggest hurdle is the business owner doesn't even know what the difference is, how it can help them.
Absolutely not. I've talked to quite a few people and they don't know. Honestly, it's like in the setup, I said, if you're an entrepreneur who starts a company and you've built it to a significant size, and now you think that you're needing some extra help, but a lot of times they don't know what help they need. You don't know what you don't know. So that makes it difficult for you to market your services, right?
Yeah.
So, you talked about messaging, Kent. So you've learned to change your messaging to become less threatening, but also to be more accurately perceived. So the term fractional, I've heard from a few people, is really not a term they like anymore. I know one of the other partners with B2B CFO told me this last week. I told him you were going to be on the show, and I said, we're doing this show on fractionals. He goes, we don't, that's kind of like a dirty word now.
Yeah.
So, and you've already alluded to that, Kent. So what is it about fractional that is no longer okay?
Well, I think fractional is a form of engagement and not necessarily doesn't define me as a person, right? And so I think of it more as maybe an interim assignment. Somebody lost their CIO or CXO and they need somebody on a more full-time basis as they look for that other replacement. So to me, that's more fractional. And so I abandoned that for several reasons, but one, I'm not looking to be full-time with anybody.
Right.
And so I don't want to have people think that way. And then the flip side is, well, I don't want, companies like, well, I don't want a fractional. I just want some part-time assistance or consulting or advice. And you say you're a fractional, so I'm going to be stuck with you for 3 months or something. And that's not something I choose
you're saying
either.
the fractional makes it sound like it's a long-term
to
thing,
me,
not just a
little
temporary, if that's
little
all they
more
need.
long-term, right?
Do you find that
It
to
could
be
be
the case,
6
Glenn?
months. It could be
This is a great example of why the term concerns us. It's so easy to misinterpret it.
Yep.
And if you misinterpret it, you may get the false impression of how we might help. And that's our biggest sensitivity, is that misunderstanding, because in fact, we do offer to help a business long term. So if somebody else thinks fractional means long term, that's okay. But not everybody interprets fractional as meaning long term. Our biggest fear is they think, oh, I only get a fraction of your commitment, and I can't operate if I only get a fraction of your commitment. So we don't want that misunderstanding. We want to know we're committed on going to help them. We're just flexible, affordable to fit their schedule. We don't have to be on payroll full time.
Yeah.
So it's really just avoiding the misunderstanding.
Mm-hmm.
This
It's a
is
great
an
point.
interesting conversation. I'm learning things here right now. So we try to cover all the spectrum, and for me personally, I say fractional part-time, meaning the same thing. It's not a full-time position, and the benefit to the business owner is you don't have to pay for a full-time C-level executive.
Sounds
you
like
pay
a good
for
thing to me.
That's the way I think a lot of people see it. It's it's what I can pay for and what I can get. And then we distinguish interim, meaning if you had a CMO and that person left and you need to fill that spot right away, we can come in and sit there. On Monday, we can be in that seat while you are recruiting for another CMO, which we all know at C levels can take some time. So we distinguish part-time fractional. I'll use those interchangeably from interim, and then project work and advisory work we also talk about. So we try to talk about the whole spectrum, but it's interesting hearing how we all might approach it a little differently.
That is interesting because if I remember correctly, Glenn, you're the one I've known. Well, actually, Kent's the one I've known longest in this room because he and I used to work with a company 25 years ago, I think it was. Yep. And we weren't in the same department or anything, but we were in the same company. We ran into each other occasionally. Glenn and I have known each other for probably 12 years or so. Andrew and I have known each other for about 12 minutes. But Glenn, I want to say, if I remember correctly, about 10 years ago, it was interesting to me because you and I were a part of a networking group together, and you were kind of persona non grata for a while because you had a client that was consuming so much of your time. And I remember you saying, that is not what I want. I don't want a client that consumes so much of my time. So why is that? Why is that a bad thing for you?
For the same reason that most business owners do not want customer concentration, the risk of you lose that customer, you lose a significant part of your revenue at one time. I became passionate about this business model because I wanted to get off the traditional CFO roller coaster of one company.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to be able to help multiple companies, and things happen. So when something happens, I don't want to start over.
Yeah, so too many eggs in one basket, basically.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same concept as making the recommendation to business owners to not have customer concentration.
It's interesting you say that because I was in the commercial real estate business for 20 years, never unemployed, and that was one of the companies that Kent and I worked with. And then all of a sudden, the company I work with decided that, hey, we're a family-owned company, but we can't get along anymore after 105 years, so we're just going to sell all of our buildings, and everybody's going to get laid off eventually. And my time came 14 years ago. And I was talking to a friend of mine down in Austin, and he said, well, you just found out that your one customer no longer needed you.
Mm-hmm.
And so as an employee, I had one customer.
Exactly.
I didn't look at it that way, but I do now. And so now, I have a lot of clients, and if I lose one or two, it ticks me off. It hurts. It's frustrating, but it's not devastating. I'm not left in the lurch totally.
And it takes you out of the business development world, right? And so if you are
Bingo.
100% committed for 6 months somewhere, a lot of people will forget about you. And so I don't want that either.
Yeah.
From our perspective, there's an upside to having multiple clients. I'm able to learn from one and pull it over for another client, and so there. And then we go across all of our clients in the country where we learn from others. So I don't know, you might see that too, but
Sure.
I think there's some synergies between our organizations.
So what's the maximum amount of time that you will allocate to an individual client? Is there such a magic number?
I don't have that magic number.
I noticed nobody wanted to talk on
right.
the question.
You know what?
And I would,
Oh,
one
go
of the
ahead.
proposals I have out right now is they have a CTO, and they've had a CTO for 20 years and didn't understand what the difference between a CIO and CTO was. And
Okay.
we can talk about that later. And so I've talked about coming in and spending, I would say, 3 to 4 days a week there
Oh, my.
initially for like a month or two,
Okay.
and then start
off.
tailoring, trailing it down
Okay.
because I need to understand the organization, and that may take a little while, right, to be
15
effective.
seconds, Glenn. How long will you give a client?
A new partner could do half day every day per week and meet a lot of needs till they get full time. Being in it for 10 years, the maximum I could give one business now would be 2 half days a week, just because I have a mature client base.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we would do full-time interim for a short term.
Yeah. But you'll do that within your organization, not necessarily you yourself.
I would do it. If I had the time, I
Yeah.
would do it.
Okay. All right, good. Well, we're going to end this segment. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the next level. Okay, so we've been talking about fractional use of C-suite executives. And so, Glenn, how does somebody know when they need you?
I think the honest answer is when it comes to a CFO role, the business owner really doesn't know that they need us. The reality is they're talking to somebody else in their inner circle. They're complaining about the value of the business. They're complaining about profits. They're complaining about cash flow. And the person they trust says, well, how is your CFO helping you? They say, I don't have one. Well, how's your CPA or your controller helping you? And they say the CPA is a tax expert or doesn't have time, and the accountant's an accountant. They're great at reconciling, but they're not analysts. And the person they're talking to says, would you like to meet somebody that can help with those issues? And the business owner will say, sure, why not?
Yeah.
That's for our role, that's most often how it comes to light.
So they got to feel that pain, and they have to express that pain in the presence of somebody who knows that they need you.
Right.
Interesting.
And I think that's similar in my case as well, because I can't start cold calling and say, "Hey, would you like some CIO services?" And I'm talking to the receptionist, and
You'd have to make a lot of those calls.
There's a lot of those calls, and but Glenn makes a great point. It's generally they're going to find out from one of their peers, and then they may talk to someone else, and eventually end up with one of us in that same regard.
You find that to be the case as well, Andrea?
A little bit different. I'll go a different. I'm going to go to the market. So when they know they need us is when they're trying to grow and somehow they've grown really well over time and their growth has stalled, or maybe even they've lost business. They're finding the market's changing. Maybe the competition's getting more intense that wasn't there before. Maybe their customers' needs are changing and they're, what's going on? So it's when those kinds of things are changing, or they want to go into a new market or expand their product and services and launch new products. That's when typically they need us.
But then how do they know you exist?
Oh, how do they know we exist? Well, I can tell you, we talk a lot with, like I said, private equity organizations, and our whole marketing is aimed at CEOs. We do a lot of social media. We do a lot of newsletter entertainment.
Entertainment.
I'd
I
like to
that.
say.
Infotainment, I think.
Yeah, infotainment. But we have a lot of resources for CEOs, and you mentioned our website earlier, chiefoutsiders.com. We have a very active blog, so there's a lot of information there for CEOs. So we do our best to get that information out and network across the country.
So, Glenn, I know you guys at B2B CFO, you said you have 19 partners here in DFW. So all 19 of you are sort of out there trolling the same pool, but because you guys don't have any restrictions geographically on where you can get your clients.
No, it's in the best interest of a business owner to find a CFO consultant that's the best fit for them. And we actually have learned that with a business owner, the chemistry and communication is as important, if not more important, than the competency. And I don't know the statistics, but there are so many business owners that could benefit from strategic financial management leadership that even with 19 of us, I don't think any of us are concerned about there being too many.
Right.
because there are just so many businesses that just still haven't even become aware how we can help them.
So are each of you out there individually, independently, marketing, networking, trying to get referrals, or do you do anything together like Chief Outsiders is doing?
Both. We have to do it individually because it's the trusted relationships are important. But we've got a great group of partners here who appreciate collaborating. We even host a highly successful event once a year that brings together Chief Outsiders and others to be a part of an education for business owners and networking opportunity and get business owners in front of all of the, fractional options that they might want to learn about. So we do collaborate, but we still have to do it individually as well.
And then you have your newsletter. Isn't it like once a quarter it comes from the organization and the rest of the time from?
Well, I appreciate you remembering the newsletter. It's actually
monthly, isn't it?
8 times a year we do it as a group.
8.
Right.
And
8.
once a quarter we do it individually. So all our relationships are reminded they get the benefit of the group, but we are individuals.
Yep.
Interesting. Okay. So how does somebody manage, let's say a company hires you guys, how do they manage you and your services when they aren't experts in that? Is it just trust and that's it? Or is there some other way for them to sort of evaluate and understand how you're doing and what they're getting for their money?
I could note a couple things. One, we're very active in putting together, obviously, the plan and the metrics of the measurement. So I think any good C-suite individual, around this room would say, here's how we are going to measure our success, and we hold ourselves accountable, and the CEO should have us be accountable. So we have regular meetings talking about that, and keeping track. The other thing I would say that I mentioned just a second ago, there's so much information available of online and as well as with chiefoutsiders.com, is that you can get a pretty quick education just by reading our blogs and our newsletters.
Okay. So Glenn, you're a numbers man. How does somebody know how to handle you?
And of course, you say I'm a numbers man, you're waiting for a numbers answer. And probably in my case, a numbers answer is the hardest thing to this question, because we can't really measure how much we're going to affect the value or the profit. So most importantly is to agree on the key objectives that we're going to focus on. So we have a common understanding of scope and expectation and stay focused on those objectives and the outcome of getting bank approval or better margin analysis that helps them make better decisions, or understanding the drivers to value that we're helping them with. So it's a mixed blessing. I can't put a number to how well I'm doing, which puts a bigger burden on me to show the objectives are being focused on. But the reality is when they discover how a CFO can help them make better financial management decisions, they often realize there's a lot of decisions they're making, and having that input, they really appreciate it, and the role evolves beyond what we originally agreed.
Yeah, and I don't think I have anything to really add to that.
I was sitting here with such anticipation.
Right.
too.
I mean, having those measurable objectives are key, and, a plan and execute against that plan. And communication is probably one of the bigger issues. If an owner or C-level executive brings you in and just thinks, come to me when you're done,
Right.
they have to have some level of engagement as well.
So tell me then, what does the fee arrangement look like? How do you structure fees for something like this?
So in the proposal I was talking about before, it was more of a monthly fee basis.
So like a retainer almost?
Right.
Okay.
And then, but you could also be, it could be hourly. I hate to do hourly because then everybody goes, oh, there's, 2,000 hours in a year and that cost me this, and I wouldn't pay a full-time guy that or lady that, right?
Sure.
And so the hourly thing, I just don't like that. And so I try and go weekly, monthly retainer would be
Okay.
my preference, or a project-based, and anyhow, I'd be curious what they think.
What do you think, Glenn?
What I found has worked well is to agree on a schedule for time and understanding a cost for that schedule. In my case, it could be a day rate, it could be a half-day rate, and they don't have to worry about an extra half hour ringing the register because it's kind of agreement for those blocks of time. But I'll let them know if they only need an hour, they don't have to pay a minimum of a half day. So that's my version of a consultant giving more than what it looks like on paper.
Okay.
Now, I'll admit that if someone asks for a retainer, I'll say, you're a smart businessman, I'm a smart businessman. If you want a retainer, I got to build in a cushion for scope creep. Now, if you trust me to only spend the time you really need, we're better off scheduling time and only paying for what you use. And business owners I talk to like that idea.
So for Chief Outsiders, we have a monthly fractional fee depending on the amount of time plus the combination of what we are committing to in our statement of work to get done. So typically I'd say it's about a third of our time. Sometimes it's 50%, and sometimes it could be more or less, but we do a little bit different than what Glenn just described.
Well, I'm kind of with Kent on this in that I hate doing anything by the hour. And in fact, it was funny when my kids were growing up, my son did yard work and my daughter did pet sitting and house sitting and, even cleaning up in the yard, everything. And they would come to me, and especially my daughter would say, well, Dad, what should I charge for this? I mean, it's only going to take me 15 minutes. And I'm like, oh, honey, you never, ever charge anybody by the hour for your time. You charge them based on what they're willing to pay you to not have to do it themselves. So it's a value thing. And so I kind of got the sense that's where you were going, Kent, was it's all based on what the value you create and not based on the amount of time it necessarily takes.
Right.
And I like that a lot better.
And then, when I'm working for, the client I have the proposal out for and I haven't received a dime for, I've been working on it already.
But
You're
you've been working
thinking
to
about
get the assignment.
things
That
and
doesn't
you're
count.
trying to, but I'm just saying if you distill it down to an hourly rate, I would say that my hours outside of the actual engagement would dilute that hourly rate significantly.
We
right?
feel the same way. We want people to call us. We don't want them to say, oh my gosh, if I pick up the phone to call Andrea, it's ching.
Start the clock, click.
Yeah, start the
Because
clock.
we hear that in the law firms all the time.
Right.
Yep.
And when I'm flying or to see a client, I'm thinking about them. I'm thinking about them at night. I'm thinking about them when I'm driving. It's so hard to put it into an hourly piece. And we really, all of us want to be a member of the management team. We want to operate as a member of the C-suite. And that doesn't go into hourly.
Yeah. We only have about 30 seconds, but do your clients typically have a board of directors, or is it really more of an individual that you're dealing with? Like you mentioned, the business owner.
Most often with a business owner, they don't have a board. I have not-for-profit clients that do have boards.
Okay.
We have both, but personally, most of mine have had boards.
Okay.
I'd say it varies.
Varies.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. We're going to take another quick break.
Okay.
Back in a second. Hi, this is Bob Gibbons with Riata Commercial Realty. If your office lease is going to be expiring in the next year or two, the one thing I would tell you definitely do not want to do is exercise a renewal option. Now, that may sound a little nuts when you negotiate for that renewal option. Why wouldn't you actually want to use it? Well, the reason is because while you want to have one as a reservation for your space so the landlord can't lease the space out from under you, that option may not actually work the way you want it to now. It may have made sense 5 years ago, but it doesn't today. The only thing that changes when you exercise a renewal option are the expiration date and the rent. But you may want to do other things like have another option to renew, have an option to terminate or expand. You may want to be able to expand now or have a new base year for your operating expenses. There's all kinds of things that need to be considered. So we recommend that you renegotiate, not renew. For more information, contact me, Bob Gibbons, at texastenantrep.com. That's texastenantrep.com. Welcome back. So one of the questions I've always had is, can a fractional, or however you want to define it, do as good a job as someone in-house? Andrea?
At the right point in the organization, in the organization's growth, the fractional is actually the better choice. And I would like to share, when I was a full-time CMO, I found that whenever I needed outside resources or help with something, I always had to start from scratch. Like, oh my gosh, who's good at this? I have so many so much more access to resources around the country. We have at Chief Outsiders what we call the Orange Book. It's sort of like the Black Book, but it's the people that we have worked with. I mentioned advertising agencies, but it can be videographers, it can be anyone. And to be in the black or in the Orange Book, we need to have worked with them, and then we do like a Yelp review on them. And so I have resources all over the country now. And the other thing that our clients really like is we're very active with peer reviews. So if I have a problem for one of my organizations I'm working with, I can pull together 15 or 20 chief marketing officers who each have 30 years experience, and we can talk about it, and I can get advice from all of those folks, which, wow, I would have loved to have had that when I was a full-time CMO, not to mention a CEO. So the access to resources has just been magnified tremendously with me being part of Chief Outsiders.
You find that in B2B CFO with so many people in the organization, Glenn?
Well, the right person is going to provide the right CFO leadership, whether they're full-time on payroll or on a 1099 consulting basis. To me, the only difference is whether or not the demands and complexity will keep that level of experience challenged for 50 hours a week, or if it's only needed 4 hours a week or 20 hours a week. So it's going to give the business what it needs. It's just a question of how much time they need from it.
Okay. So are there any compromises that a business makes when they hire somebody on a fractional basis than full-time?
The obvious compromise is sometimes a business owner wants an immediate answer to their question, and if you're not sitting there at a desk in their office, you're not readily available, and so they have to have a little bit of patience to get the answer they want.
Which with the business owner is not always the case, right?
They're not known for their patience?
So some people may prefer having someone sitting in the desk all the time, and may not be as open to this model as others because of Glenn's point. That's a great point.
Is there a perception that there's a higher degree of trust or expertise or whatever because you're an outside consultant than if you were an in-house full-time employee?
Well, I think it gives us a little bit more objectivity than if you're within the walls of an organization, and there's political pressures and things that people react to or respond to or don't respond because of that, and we may not have that same feeling.
So you don't get involved in the office politics much?
Well, I don't think you can avoid it at all.
Even as a
you have to
consultant?
be thoughtful of it, mindful of it, but I also know that I'm not relying on just that client forever, right?
Yeah.
And so I'll try and keep the peace to the extent that I need to, but I'm also not afraid to disrupt things either.
Right.
It's kind of, I think that's part of our job, is to point out those things that they've been living with for whatever reason for so long, and for cultural reasons, and hey, you need to change the way you're doing this.
I was going to just comment that sometimes we get to point out the elephant in the room.
Yep.
That maybe a full-time person wouldn't feel comfortable saying that, but we can play that role and help companies bring up things that they need to talk about and work through.
Sure.
Yeah, it's interesting because I tell clients all the time, part of my job is to challenge your assumptions. Because too many people, I help companies find property to lease or buy for their companies to occupy, and sometimes get rid of it. So I'm kind of a fractional
I agree.
chief real estate officer.
Yeah.
That sounds so funny even saying it. But so I tell them, my job is to challenge your assumptions, because a lot of times all you have before you is you think you just need to move an office, but there's way more to it than that. How does that fit into the corporate goals and objectives, et cetera, et cetera? So I agree with you that I got to think that you get to stay out of the fray, but you get to sort of point out from a higher level what they really need to know, whether they want to know it or not.
Yep.
I find it interesting when a business owner wants other employees to accept a change, when they can point to an independent consultant making the recommendation. It sometimes gives it credibility, and also the owner takes a step away from if the employees don't like it.
So many consultants have been hired to pass the buck so that the decision maker who should be making that decision doesn't have to, can push it off on somebody else. I hate that. It's the weasel effect, I would call it. Is there Is there a need or a requirement, I guess I should say, that you stay working within a particular industry vertical that is your expertise? Or are you interchangeable to pretty much any industry?
For me personally, my experience has mostly been in business to business, but we do have others within Chief Outsiders that do business to consumer. But other than that, the industry really isn't that important. Mine has mostly been in healthcare, and I find that the clients that are interested in talking to me are from healthcare, but it's not exclusive.
Okay.
There are others that I've worked with.
So do you find that it's the client that thinks that that's a bigger issue than you?
Right. The client thinks this is special, and and there are some benefits, the people and the connections you can make for them, and
Yeah, but you can just pull out the Orange Book, right?
well, and I'm actually talking about maybe in lead sources like, oh, I've worked with so and so before, and now they run this organization, and that might be a good partner for you, and those kinds of things.
Gotcha.
So, but you're right, the Orange Book is also big.
What do you find, Glenn?
Business owners are definitely sensitive to it. And what I've learned is to help them understand where, if it's me they're talking to, my experience relates to the dynamics they're dealing with, the issues they're dealing with. And that's builds the trust. Reality is, if they're a manufacturing company, they're not going to trust a CFO who has zero manufacturing experience. If they're healthcare, they're not going to trust a CFO that has zero healthcare experience. But those are exceptions. They're not the norm. The norm is most of us with experience have dealt with the same dynamics, and that's what the business owner really needs to hear. We understand their problems.
Good point.
So I think at the strategic level, I think we can operate a little more agnostically than we can when it comes to the an implementation level. And so when I say that, the business, in my case, the business of IT, what are your goals as a business? Where are you today? How are we going to map a strategy? And, what are the deltas that we need to solve for to get you where you need to go? But then when it comes to actually choosing a solution and implementing a solution, I think you have to go deeper within the industry. Because most of those things are specific, right? And so even in our space, so the commercial real estate world that you and I have been in part of for so many years, the B2B, B2C. So in the commercial office world, it's B2B, and these tools that you need in that world are not quite as, varied as the tools that you need in a B2C business like multifamily. In the multifamily world, everybody finds an apartment now on their phone, right? And so not everybody's looking for office space on their phone, so that,
Yeah.
There are different models even within a given industry.
Okay, so how often are you hired to prepare a company to make some major shift, whether it's selling, taking on an outside partner, et cetera? Glenn, I know you, B2B CFO has an annual event all around exit planning.
Well, our event has reminded business owners that a CFO can be an integral part of preparing for that transition, because we know it from the inside out. We can help the business demonstrate its full value to the succeeding owners, and we can help them prepare for it. So that's really the tail end of giving them strategic financial management leadership, is showing the value and getting full value at the transition.
Interesting.
The events that trigger them thinking about Chief Outsiders are, they've just recently obtained a large investment, either from private equity or from other kinds of investors. They know that they want to go into a new market, maybe expand geographically, or they want to launch a new product, those kinds of things. And once again, what I mentioned at the beginning is that, or they've been trying to grow and they've just gotten frustrated that they haven't gotten that growth.
So Kent, you mentioned something earlier that I wanted to follow up on. You said there's a difference between a chief technology officer and a chief information officer. What is that difference?
So the chief information officer is the business side of IT. And when I say that, there's three. Think of a stool. I hate to use that analogy because so many people do. So there's three legs. There's the infrastructure, which is your networks, your PCs, that connection to the internet, your phone systems, that kind of thing. there's the application side of solutions, right? And so software, ERP systems, that type of solution, right? And then the third would be the business side, the executive branch of an IT organization, and that's the one working with the business owners to align with their goals and find the appropriate strategies to execute with technology, just like a CFO does on the financial side. As you look at the maturity or the life cycle of a business, they have different needs along that maturity scale, and so at the beginning, somebody made the point earlier, maybe we are a good fit, but then as they demand more time and it's more of a full-time job, then maybe it's a different solution for them. So technology is the same. It changes as the organization grows.
Gotcha. Okay, well, I can't believe I'm saying this, but we are at the end of our time. So thank you so much for being on the show. Andrea Overman, Chief Marketing Officer with Chief Outsiders. Please find her online at chiefoutsiders.com. Kent Barner, CIO, Chief Information Officer with CIO Suite. You can find him online at ciosuite.com. And Glenn Catlin, a partner with and CFO with B2B CFO. And you can find him at glenncatlincfo.com. That's spelled Katlein. And really appreciate you guys being with us today. If you want to learn more about the show, listeners, please go to nextlevelshow.com, or you can find us on podcast or YouTube by searching The Next Level Show. We'll be back next week with another great guest.